The day after his 52nd birthday, Wade Renfro woke up in the cab of a 1996 Ford F-150 in the back lot of a Cracker Barrel outside Asheville with $210 folded into the breast pocket of his work shirt and a letter from a probate office in Tennessee resting on the dash where the rain had not quite gotten to it. The letter had come to his post office box 3 days earlier. He had read it twice in the parking lot of the post office and once more sitting at the counter of a Waffle House on Tunnel Road, and he had not been able to make sense of it either time. It said his uncle Earl Renfro had died in 2009, which Wade already knew, and that the estate had been in probate 17 years because nobody had stepped forward to claim it, and that the remaining asset was a piece of real property in Polk Hollow, Tennessee, currently encumbered by a $10 tax lien that the county would forgive if a qualified heir paid the back filing fee within 30 days. The asset was Polk Hollow Volunteer Fire Station No. 2, decommissioned 2011, vacant ever since. The letter said Wade was the only living male in the Renfro line. The letter said the deed would be his if he came down and signed for it. Wade had not spoken his uncle's name out loud in 31 years. His father, who had died in October of 2019, had not spoken Earl's name in 40. The two brothers had quit each other in 1979 over something Wade had never been told straight, and the silence had settled into the family the way silence does when nobody is willing to be the first one to put a word into it. Wade's father had carried his grudge into the ground. Wade had inherited the grudge along with the truck and a Stanley toolbox and a buck folding knife and an apartment lease that ran out the month his wife Cheryl filed for divorce. 14 months later he had $210, a truck full of his father's tools, and a letter from a town he had been to exactly twice in his life. He folded the letter and put it in the glove box. He started the truck. The engine caught the way his father's engines always caught, on the second turn with a small reluctant cough that meant nothing was wrong. He pulled out of the Cracker Barrel lot at 6 in the morning and turned the F-150 west onto Interstate 40. It rained the whole way down through the gorge. The wipers on the F-150 were original, and they smeared the water across the windshield in a slow pulse that Wade did not bother to fix. He drove with one hand on the wheel and one hand resting flat on the seat beside him where the toolbox sat. The toolbox was a 1973 Stanley, red enamel scuffed down to the gray steel along every corner. His father had carried it to work every day for 38 years. Wade had carried it home from the funeral home in October of 2019 and had not opened it since. He could feel the weight of it through the seat. Wrenches, his father's tape measure, the buck knife folded into the bottom tray, and the 2 iron keys that had come on a wire ring tied with kitchen string. One key was for the apartment Wade no longer lived in. The other key the lawyer in Asheville had handed him in a yellow envelope with a note attached in his father's handwriting that said only PHFS No. 2. Wade had not understood what that meant until the probate letter arrived. The exit for Polk Hollow came up at 11:30. The sign was small and the paint had gone soft. Wade took the off-ramp and followed a state road south through pine country that opened slowly into pasture and then into the long, shallow valley where the town sat. He passed a closed Sunoco station. He passed a cinder block building with a hand-painted sign that said Feed and Seed that had a pickup truck and an old Buick in the gravel lot. He passed the Polk Hollow Methodist Church, white frame, white steeple, gravestones starting at the property line and going up the hill behind it. Then Main Street 2 blocks long, and at the south end of Main Street the fire station. Wade pulled the WUV 150 into the gravel apron in front of it and cut the engine. The building was red brick. 2 truck bays, both shuttered with wood roll-up doors painted the same red as the brick and faded to the color of clay. The bays were set under a flat front parapet that carried the words Polk Hollow Volunteer Fire in slow, careful black letters arched across the brick, with the number 2 set inside a painted circle below. Above the parapet rose the bell tower, square brick on 3 sides and louvered wood on the 4th, with a tin pyramid cap that was rusted through in 2 places. The bell was not visible from the street, but Wade could see the outline of the wooden frame where it had once hung. The whole building looked like it had been waiting for somebody for a long time and had given up expecting anybody. Wade sat in the truck for a minute with his hands on the wheel. The rain had stopped somewhere east of Newport, and the sky over Polk Hollow was the color of old aluminum. A crow called from the steeple of the Methodist church. Wade reached into the glove box for the keys, took the iron one off the wire ring, and got out of the truck. The padlock on the side door had rusted closed, He worked his father's WD-40 into the keyway from a can he kept under the seat. He waited. He tried the key. It turned on the third attempt. The door opened on hinges that had not been oiled in 17 years, and the sound they made was the sound of a thing remembering how to be a door. He stepped inside. The smell hit him first. Old motor oil, dust, the faint acid smell of mouse, and underneath all of it, the long, faint smell of wood smoke that had soaked into the brick over 50 years and could not be aired out. The bay floor was concrete, painted gray, with the outlines of 2 pumper trucks still visible in old tire stains. A workbench ran the length of the east wall. Hooks above it held the ghosts of equipment. Coils of empty rope, a fire axe with the head wrapped in oilcloth, a kerosene lantern, 2 pairs of leather gauntlets stiff with age. At the back of the bay, a wooden staircase climbed the wall to a second-story landing. To the right of the staircase, a doorway led into what looked like a small office with a roll-top desk and a metal filing cabinet and a calendar on the wall still turned to October of 2011. Wade walked the length of the bay slowly. His boots sounded loud on the concrete. He stopped at the workbench and ran one hand along the wood. Some said he had taken care of this bench. The grain was smooth where 40 years of forearms had polished it. There was a vise mounted at one end, and the jaws of the vise still moved when he turned the handle. A small wooden box on the bench held twist drills sorted by size, each one nested into a felt-lined slot. Wade lifted out a 1/4-inch bit. The cutting edge was still bright. Somebody had been here taking care of these things until they could not be here anymore. He went up the staircase. The treads creaked. The second floor was a single long room with 3 windows on the west wall and a small kitchenette in the corner, and 4 cots against the far wall, beds the volunteer crew had used on overnight shifts. The cots were stripped to the steel frames. A coffee pot sat on a hot plate that had not been plugged in since before Wade's father stopped speaking. The bell tower stairwell opened off the north end of the room. The stairs were narrow and turned once. Wade climbed them. At the top of the bell tower, he found the bell still hung in its frame, dust on the bronze, the pull rope coiled neatly on a peg beside it. He stood there for a long minute looking at it. He could see the whole town from up here. Main Street running north, the Methodist steeple, the feed store, the shuttered diner on the corner of Main and 2nd, the river bottom past the train tracks, the 2 abandoned coal tipples on the ridge south of town that had stopped pulling coal in 1987 when the Polk Hollow mine closed and had stood there silver-gray ever since. Wade looked at all of it. Somewhere down the valley, a freight train was running south, the low note of its horn carrying up to him through the wood louvers. He went back down the bell tower stairs and stopped on the second-floor landing and looked at his father's key in his hand. He thought about what Earl must have looked like sitting up here. He had no clear picture of his uncle. He remembered a tall, thin man with a brushed mustache and a chambray shirt rolled at the cuffs. He remembered being maybe 6 years old and being told to go play outside while the grown men talked. He remembered his father, years later, saying only one thing about Earl that Wade could still recall verbatim. Earl made his choice, now he can live with it. Wade sat down on the top step of the staircase. He set the toolbox between his boots. He put his hand on the lid and left it there. After a while he got up and went back outside to the truck for his sleeping bag. The first 3 days were work. There is a kind of labor that does not require thought, and a man who has spent 31 years on a factory floor knows the rhythm of it without having to set his mind to it. Wade woke at first light in the upstairs room of the fire station, lying on a cot he had wiped down with a rag and water, with the sleeping bag pulled to his chest. He boiled water on a camp stove he had brought in from the truck. He drank black coffee out of a tin cup that had belonged to his father. He went downstairs. He started at the south wall and worked north. He swept first. The broom he found in the office closet had been kept clean and the bristles were still firm. He swept the bay floor in long passes, raising a fine gray dust that settled on his pant legs and the toes of his boots. He carried the dust out in 5-gallon buckets and emptied it behind the building into a patch of dead goldenrod. He swept the workbench. He swept the stairs. He swept the upstairs room and the bell tower landing. By the end of the first day, his shoulders hurt in the old familiar way that meant something had been done. The second day he opened the truck bays. The wood roll-up doors had not moved in 17 years. The track was clogged up with bird nests, and the springs had lost their tension. Wade pulled the nests down with a rake. He sprayed the track with the WD-40. He worked the doors by hand, pulling and resting and pulling until the south bay door came open about 3 feet and stopped against a piece of warped track he could not free. He left it at 3 feet. Light came in through the opening and he stood for a moment, letting his eyes adjust. The bay looked different with the door up. Bigger. It looked like it could hold a truck again. The third day he opened the office. The roll-top desk was locked. He worked the lock with a paper clip and the back of his pocket knife for 40 minutes before it gave. Inside the desk, Earl had kept his papers as carefully as he had kept his drill bits. There were 3 ring binders labeled Beige-Tish 1968 to 1979, Beige-Tish 1980 to 1989, and Tish 1990 to 1998, and a fourth that was unlabeled and that held what looked like personal correspondence and a stack of receipts paper clipped by year. There was a Bible on the bottom shelf with a leather cover. There was a small framed photograph of a woman in a printed dress standing in front of a sycamore tree. The woman was maybe 30 years old. The photograph had been taken in maybe 1962. Wade did not know her. He sat down at the desk in Earl's chair. The wood arms were worn smooth where Earl's forearms had rested for 30 years. Wade put his palms flat on the desktop. He sat that way for a long time. On the morning of the 4th day, a Chevy 3/4 ton with rust along the rocker panels pulled into the gravel apron and a woman climbed out. She was maybe 70, broad-shouldered, with iron gray hair cut short and a green canvas jacket over a checked flannel. She walked across the apron without hurry. Wade was at the workbench scrubbing the vise with a wire brush. He looked up. "Heard somebody was up here," she said. She did not introduce herself. She came as far as the open bay door and stopped and looked in, heard the south bay come up. "Took you what, half a day?" "Day and a half," Wade said. She nodded. She was looking past him at the workbench. He saw her eyes move along the row of hooks above it and rest for a second on the fire axe wrapped in oilcloth. "Earl took good care of his tools," she said. Wade set the wire brush down. He wiped his hands on a rag. He came toward her until they were standing maybe 6 feet apart in the open bay door. "I'm Wade Renfro," he said. "Earl was my uncle. I know who you are." She had a way of looking at a man that was direct without being unkind. "Maybelle Cobb. I own the feed store across from the Methodist. I've owned it since 1976. I knew Earl from when he was 40 years old until the day they took him to the hospital in Knoxville." She paused. "I'm sorry for your loss." Wade thought about saying he had not really known his uncle. He thought about saying his father had not spoken Earl's name in 40 years. He did not say either of those things. He nodded. Mabel looked past him into the bay again. "You staying here," she said. "For now. You eaten today?" Wade considered the question. He had not eaten since a bag of pork rinds the previous afternoon. He shook his head. "Come over to the store at noon. I'll have soup on." She did not wait for an answer. She turned and walked back to the Chevy. At the door of the truck she stopped and looked back. "The bell rope needs oil," she said. "Up in the tower." Earl always said a dry rope was a busted neck waiting to happen. She drove off. Wade went back to the workbench. He picked up the wire brush. He stood there with it in his hand for maybe 2 minutes. Then he set it down again and walked across the bay and climbed the stairs to the bell tower. The pull rope was coiled on its peg the way Maybelle had said. He took it down. The hemp was dry and stiff under his hand. He held it for a moment looking at the bell. Then he carried the rope back downstairs to the workbench and oiled it with neatsfoot oil out of a tin can that had belonged to Earl, and that still had Earl's thumbprint pressed into the dust along the rim. He went to the feed store at noon. The soup was navy bean. He paid Maybelle $1 for the bowl because she would not take more. She did not ask him questions while he ate. She stood at the counter wrapping a roll of binder twine and told him about the town. The mine had closed in 1987. The interstate had been finished in 1981 and had pulled traffic off the old state highway, and the town had emptied slowly after that the way water leaves a creek bed in dry weather. The fire department had been merged into the county in 2011 because Polk Hollow could not afford to keep 2 volunteer companies running anymore. The bell up in the tower had not been rung since 2009. "Why?" Wade said. Maybelle did not look up from the twine. "Because that was the year Earl died," she said, "and nobody else had the heart for it." He went back to the station and worked the rest of the day on the office. He read 3 pages of the 1979 dispatch binder before he had to close it. He did not have the room in him yet for what was in those pages. A boy came by on a bicycle that afternoon, maybe 17 years old, black, with a wool watch cap pulled down to his eyebrows. He rode past the open South Bay door 3 times in 20 minutes, and on the 3rd pass, he stopped and put his foot down on the gravel and looked in. Wade was at the workbench again, this time taking apart the vise to clean it. He looked up. The boy looked at him. Neither of them said anything. After about a minute, the boy lifted one hand off the handlebar in something that was not quite a wave, but was not nothing either. And then he pushed off and rode away. Wade kept working on the vise. By the end of the second week, he had cleared the bays, swept and washed the upstairs room, scrubbed the office, oiled the bell rope and rehung it, and gotten the south bay door working all the way up and all the way down. He had walked to the feed store at noon twice more and had eaten soup. Maybelle had not asked him a single personal question. On the Friday morning of the second week, she put a paper sack on the counter and slid it across to him with the soup. Inside the sack were 2 sandwiches in wax paper, 3 apples, and a mason jar of sorghum molasses. "Sorghum boils on the 18th, she said, down at the Henderson place. Cleve will be cooking. You ought to come," Wade said he would think about it. He carried the sack back to the station. He ate one of the sandwiches at the workbench. He gave the second to a stray cat that had moved into the bell tower somewhere around the end of the first week. He went up the bell tower stairs to give the cat the apple core, and as he came down, he stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked at the wall to the right of the doorway. There was a cabinet there he had been walking past for 2 weeks without really looking at. It was tall and narrow, 4 feet wide and maybe 6 feet high, made of oak boards that had been planed and fitted carefully and stained the same dark color as the wainscoting around it. From a distance, it looked like a built-in supply cabinet. He had assumed it held the spare hoses or the bell tower maintenance tools. He had even tried the doors on his second day at the station. The cabinet had not opened. He had assumed it was locked and had moved on. He stopped now and looked at it properly. The doors had no visible hinges. There were no handles. There was no lock. The cabinet sat flush against the wall, panel against panel, the way a piece of finished furniture sits against a wall, and the more he looked at it, the less it looked like a supply cabinet, and the more it looked like something that had been built to be there for a long time. He ran his hand along the right edge. He felt for a seam. He felt a thin, clean line where the cabinet met the wainscoting, and when he pressed his fingers into the seam and pulled, the cabinet did not move. He knocked on the cabinet with his knuckle. The sound came back hollow. He knocked on the wainscoting beside the cabinet. The sound came back solid. Wade stepped back. He stood there for a minute looking at the cabinet. He thought about going up to the feed store and asking Maybelle whether she had ever seen Earl open it. He thought about leaving it alone. He thought about the letter in the glove box, and the key on the wire ring, and the 31 years of silence between his father and his uncle. He went back to the workbench for tools. He took a small flat pry bar, a wood chisel, a rubber mallet, and a flashlight. He came back to the cabinet. He worked the flat end of the pry bar into the seam on the right side, gentle at first, then with more pressure as he understood that the cabinet had been built tight. The oak was old and hard. He could feel the bar bite into the wood. He stopped, eased the bar out, moved it down 6 inches, and tried again. He worked the seam for an hour. The cabinet did not move. He sat back on his heels. He turned the flashlight on the seam and ran it slowly along the right edge from the floor to the top of the cabinet. 3/4 of the way up he saw it, a small irregularity in the trim where a piece of beading had been cut and replaced. He stood and put his finger on it. The beading shifted under his thumb. He worked his thumbnail under it and lifted, and a 4-inch section of beading came away in his hand. Behind it was an iron latch. Wade looked at the latch for a long time. It was hand-forged. The kind of latch a man who built things made for himself because he could not find in a store that did what he wanted. Wade lifted the latch. Something inside the cabinet released with a small wooden click. He set the pry bar down and pulled at the right door, and the door swung open on a long brass hinge that had been mortised flush so it would not show. The inside of the cabinet was deeper than the outside dimensions had suggested. There was no shelving. There was a single steel firebox on the floor, the kind a man with a fire department's worth of paperwork stored in his own private archive. The firebox was painted the dark olive of war surplus gear, and it had a brass plaque riveted to the front that said Renfro Steel Trenton OAO 1948. Wade knelt down in front of the cabinet. He pulled the firebox out. It was heavy, heavier than papers should have been. He set it on the floor of the second-story landing and he looked at it. The hasp was closed, but the padlock that hung in the hasp was open, hanging loose by its own weight, as if Earl had unlocked it once a long time ago and then never bothered to lock it again. Wade lifted the hasp. He opened the lid. Inside, packed neatly and in order, were 4 things. A leather-bound notebook, dark brown. This leather softened at the spine from a thumb that had opened it many times. A manila envelope, large, unsealed, full of what looked like photographs. A second envelope, business-size, sealed, with handwriting on the front in black ink. and underneath all of it, tied with kitchen string into a flat compact bundle the size of a brick, the money. Wade sat back on the floor. His knees were on the cold pine boards, and his hands had gone still at his sides. He could hear the wind in the bell tower above him, and the slow tick of metal cooling in the kerosene lantern on the workbench downstairs, and his own breath. He looked at the bundle of money. He did not pick it up. He did not pick anything up for maybe 2 minutes. Then he reached for the business envelope. The writing on the front said, in a deliberate cursive Wade did not recognize and somehow recognized anyway, "For the boy I couldn't get to." He turned the envelope over. The flap was sealed with a strip of brown packing tape that had yellowed at the edges. He worked his thumbnail under the tape. The seal cracked. He opened the flap. Inside was a folded letter, 5 pages, lined notebook paper written on both sides in the same cursive. He took out the letter. He unfolded the first page. He laid it flat on his thigh. "Wade," it said. "If you're reading this, then somebody finally told you where to find me. I don't know how long that took. I am writing this in the spring of 2009, and the doctor in Knoxville says I have 6 months, and probably less. So I am putting down here the things I should have come and said to you face to face years ago, when there was still time for them to do you any good. I am sorry that I am putting them on paper instead. The reason I am putting them on paper is that I made a promise to your father in October of 1979, and I kept that promise until the day he died, and I am not going to break it now even though he is gone. The promise was that I would not tell you the truth about the fire on Bowater Road as long as he was alive. He died 3 weeks ago. I read his obituary in the Knoxville paper. I am sorry for your loss, son. He was my brother and I loved him until the day he stopped speaking to me, and I had to." Wade read the paragraph twice. He folded the page closed. He put the letter back in the envelope. He put the envelope back in the firebox. He closed the lid of the firebox. He sat on the pine boards of the second-story landing with his hands on his knees, and he stayed there a long time. He did not open the firebox again that night. He went down to the workbench. He picked up a rag. He went back to cleaning the vise that he had already cleaned twice. He worked the rag over the steel jaws until the brass nameplate stamped into the casting came back through the old grease. "Craftsman made in USA." He set the rag down. He picked it up. He set it down again. He stood at the workbench in the gray afternoon light with his hands flat on the wood. After a while, he went out to the truck. He sat in the cab. He turned the key one notch so the cheater put him on, and a station out of Crossville was playing a Merle Haggard song he had heard 100 times. He listened to the whole song without moving. He turned the radio off. He sat in the truck until dark. When he went back inside, he climbed the stairs to the upstairs room and lay down on the cot in his clothes. He could see the cabinet from the cot if he turned his head. He turned his head the other way. He slept badly. In the morning, he made coffee. He sat at the workbench drinking it. The October light came in low through the open south belt and lit the workbench in a long flat slab of yellow. Wade drank the coffee. He thought about the letter. He thought about the bundle of money. He thought about his father in the hospital in October of 2019, in that last week, when the morphine had loosened his father's mouth, and his father had said something Wade had not understood at the time and had not asked about. His father had said, "I told him to keep it." He never told him to keep what. Wade had thought his father was rambling. He had let it pass. He thought now that maybe his father had not been rambling. He stood up from the workbench and went up the stairs to the second-story landing. He opened the cabinet. He took the firebox out. He set it on the workbench in the downstairs bay where the morning light was good. He opened the lid. He took out the leather notebook. He read it in order, starting on page 1. The first entry was dated October 14, 1968. It said, "Took over as chief today, Buck retired, crew of 6, 2 trucks, 1 ladder. We will be all right." The handwriting was steady and the lines were straight. Earl had been keeping a private journal alongside the official dispatch log. The dates matched the dates in the binder in the office, but where the binder recorded only the call, the time, the address, and the disposition, the journal recorded what Earl had been thinking. The journal recorded what he had been afraid of. The journal recorded the small mistakes a man makes that nobody else sees. Wade read steadily for an hour. He read about a kitchen fire on Maple Street in 1971, where the woman of the house had cried in the yard, and Earl had not known what to say to her. He read about a tractor fire in 1973, where the farmer had stood with his hat in his hand and watched $22,000 of equipment burn because the pumper truck had not gotten there in time. He read about Earl's daily life. He read entries about a woman named Lila, who appeared maybe 40 times across the early years of the journal, always with affection and never with possessiveness. Lila came over for supper. Lila made me a peach pie. Lila said if I ever get killed running into a building, she will be very angry with me. Wade did not know who Lila was. He guessed from the photograph in the desk that she was the woman in the printed dress in front of the sycamore. He turned the page. The entries from 1979 began on the right side of the binding. He stopped before he read them. He stood up from the workbench. He took the leather notebook with him, and he carried it up the stairs to the second-story landing, and he sat down on the cot with the notebook on his lap. He thought about how he wanted to do this. He decided to do it the way Earl had written it, one entry at a time, in order. He opened the notebook to the spring of 1979. The entries were the same as before, routine, a grass fire out near the river, a chimney fire on 2nd Street, a false alarm at the school. He read steadily through April and May and June. He came to July. The Henderson barn to transformer strike on the 7th of July and burned to the foundation in 40 minutes. Earl had written in the journal that night, "We got there in 9 minutes and it was already gone. Cleve has not stopped crying. I don't know what to say to him." The barn was his father's. Wade thought about the soup at the feed store and Maybelle Cobb saying Cleve will be cooking. He turned the page. August, September. The October 16, 1979 entry covered 3 full pages. Wade read them. "I should have known something was wrong when the call came in at 1:20 in the morning. The dispatcher who took the call was Ruby Tomlin. And Ruby has worked the night shift in Polk Hollow for 14 years, and Ruby is the steadiest woman I have ever known on a phone. When she called me, she was crying. The fire was on Bowater Road and the house was the Inman place. Toby was 9, I knew the Inmans. Frank Inman was my closest friend in the world, and Toby was his only boy." Earl had written the rest in shorter sentences than he had used anywhere else in the journal. The sentences had a kind of clipped restraint to them, the way a man writes when he is trying to keep himself from breaking the pen. "We were there in 7 minutes. The house was already gone. The volunteer who had taken the first call at the dispatch office told us when we pulled up that the call had come in 47 minutes earlier from a man whose voice she did not recognize, and that the man had hung up before giving an address, and that she had spent 35 minutes calling every house on every road that started with B before she got to Bowater. The crew got Frank out of the front room. We could not get to Toby. The room he was in was full collapse by the time we got the south wall open. Frank held me by the front of my coat for 10 minutes screaming his son's name. When the fire marshal arrived an hour later, the marshal told me that the original call to the dispatch desk had been traced to the payphone at the Esso station on Route 11. The payphone at the Esso station is 2 miles from my brother's house. My brother had been at the VFW until 12:30 that night. My brother had been drinking. I drove to my brother's house at 4 in the morning. He was sitting on his front porch in his work clothes. He was drunk. He said, "I tried to call you." I did try. I said, "You called the dispatch line. You did not call my home line. I have a home line." He said, "I couldn't remember the number." He said it again. "I couldn't remember the number." He sat on the porch and he cried for about an hour. I sat with him. Wade stopped reading. He sat on the cot with the notebook open on his knees and he looked at the wall above the kitchenette. There was a calendar there that was still turned to October of 2011, and the picture on the calendar was a winter scene with a barn and a fence and snow. He read the next paragraph. When the marshal's report came back, 2 weeks later, the report said the call had been delayed and that the Inman house could not have been saved with a timelier call because of the speed of the fire and the location of the boy. The marshal told me this privately. He did not put it in the report that way. The report said only that the call had been delayed. The Inman family asked me to my face whether I had been late getting the truck on the road. I told them I had not been late. They asked me whether somebody had been late getting the call out. I told them yes. They asked me who. Earl had let half a page of the notebook go blank there. Then he had written, "I did not tell them. I told them I did not know." I told my brother that night that I would never tell anyone and that he would have to live with what he had done. He took that as me protecting him. He should have taken it as me protecting Toby's mother from knowing the rest. Frank Inman never spoke to my brother again, because my brother stopped going to church and stopped coming into town and stopped sitting in the same room with people who knew the Inmans. My brother decided that the easiest way to live with what he had done was to be angry at me for not having gotten the truck to Bowater Road in 3 minutes instead of 7. He told his wife I had been drinking. He told his son I had been drinking. He stopped speaking to me in November of 1979, and he never spoke to me again. He kept that going for 40 years. I want you to understand, Wade, that I never blamed your father for what happened on Bowater Road. He made a phone call when he was drunk, and he could not remember a 4-digit number. He should have been able to remember it. He could not. People die because of small things. I have lived long enough to know that. I never blamed him. I blamed him only for letting you and your mother believe what he believed about me. I would have lived with the silence forever if it had stayed between him and me, but it didn't. It got into you. And here we are. Wade closed the notebook. He sat on the cot for a long time without moving. Outside, somewhere on Main Street, a pickup truck went past with a bad muffler. The cat that lived in the bell tower came down the stairs and crossed the floor of the upstairs room and sat in the rectangle of sun under the west window. Wade watched the cat. The cat watched the wall. After a while, Wade got up. He went downstairs. He went out to the truck. He sat in the cab. He did not turn the radio on. He sat with his hands on the steering wheel. If you have been listening this far, and you are a person who has lost a parent, and you have ever wondered what your father got carried around with him that he never told you about, then I would like you to do me one small kindness. I would like you to subscribe to this channel. Because what comes next is the part of Wade's story that I have been waiting all day to tell you. The part where the people of Polk Hollow start to come for him in the slow and unhurried way that small towns come for their own, whether he is ready for it or not. Wade sat in the truck for another half hour. Then he got out and went back inside and went up the stairs and read the rest of the notebook. He read the entries from November 1979 through the end of the year. They were short. Earl had stopped writing about Lila by the end of November. He had written instead about the volunteer crew, about the maintenance schedule, about the cost of replacing a worn pump seal. The journal continued for 30 more years. There were long stretches where Earl wrote almost nothing personal, only the running tally of the work. There were other stretches, mostly in the 1990s, where he wrote at length about a young volunteer named Cleve Henderson, whose barn had burned in 1971 and who had come on the crew in 1982 and who had become, slowly, the closest thing Earl had to a son. Wade read about Lila's death from cancer in 1991. He read Earl's 3-sentence entry from that day, which said, "Lila died this afternoon at the hospital in Knoxville. She did not know me at the end. I will miss her for the rest of my life." There was nothing else. He read about Earl's retirement from the chief's position in 1998 and his decision to keep Cummings in 3 days a week to maintain the equipment until the merger in 2011. He read the last entry. It was dated April 9, 2009. It said, "Pulled the bell rope down today and oiled it. Set it on the peg. The doctor wants me back in Knoxville on Monday for the next round. I do not think I will be back to this building. I have left what I needed to leave. I have written what I needed to write. The boy I could not get to is buried up the hill at the Methodist with his mother and his father. And I have been bringing him a small thing every Decoration Day for 30 years. Mostly stones from the river. He liked the river. Frank used to take him there to fish for bluegill. I do not know if Wade will ever come here. I hope he will. If he does, I hope he will understand that I am leaving him this place because I have nothing else to leave anybody, and because he is the one who can finish what I could not. Which is to say, he is the one who can love this town without having to lie to anybody about who he is or what his name is. That is a thing I could not do. He can." Wade closed the notebook. He put it back in the firebox. He took out the manila envelope and he looked at the photographs. There were 30 of them. They were Polaroids. They showed the Inman house from the road on the morning after the fire, in cold gray light, with the south wall caved in and the porch posts still standing, and a length of garden hose lying in the yard where somebody had tried to use it before the trucks came. They showed the foundation, after the debris had been cleared, with the outline of the kitchen still visible in the scorch pattern on the concrete. They showed Frank Inman standing in his front yard 6 days after the fire, in a black suit, holding a small wooden box that Wade understood after a moment to be Toby's ashes. Earl had taken the photographs the way an honest man documents a thing he intends to remember. There was no commentary, there were no captions, there was only the record. Wade put the photographs back in the envelope. He looked at the bundle of money. He cut the kitchen string with his pocket knife. The bundle came apart into stacks. The stacks were 20s and 50s, banded in paper bands that said Commercial Bank Polk Hollow with dates ranging from 1991 through 2008. Wade counted. He counted twice. There were $43,000. He sat at the workbench with the money in front of him, and he did not know what to do with it. He went outside and sat on the steps of the south bay door and watched the light go. The boy on the bicycle came past again at dusk. He rode slowly. When he got to the gravel apron, he stopped. He put his foot down. Wade looked up at him from the steps. "You're Earl's nephew," the boy said. It wasn't a question. He had a thin voice that was still settling into a man's range. "That's right," Wade said. The boy nodded as if a thing he had been holding in his head had finally lined up with a thing he could see. "My grandmother said you were down here. She said, 'Don't bother you.'" Wade considered the boy. The boy had a careful, watchful face and the kind of stillness in his shoulders that Wade recognized from his own younger life. He was wearing a denim jacket over a hoodie, and his hands were in the pockets of the jacket, and he had not taken them out the whole time they had been talking. "What's your name?" Wade said. "Darrell Pickett." "How old are you, Darrell Pickett?" 17, 18 in March. "Go to schools?" "Sometimes." The boy looked at the brick of the fire station above Wade's head. "My grandma said your uncle painted the sign on the front of this building," he said. "Up there. The letters. She said he was the only one in town who could do it right." Wade looked up at the painted letters on the parapet above him, "Polk Hollow Volunteer Fire." He had not thought about who had painted them. "That right," he said. Darrell shrugged. "That's what she said. She said he painted half the signs in town. The feed store and the Methodist, and a couple of the old store windows on Main. She said he could let her a fire truck in an afternoon. She said he charged $10 and a glass of buttermilk." Wade looked at the boy. The boy was looking at the lettering on the parapet, his head tipped back, his eyes moving along the curve of the letters. Wade understood after a moment that the boy was reading the letters not as words but as shapes. The boy had spent time looking at those letters. "You ride past here a lot," Wade said. Darrell looked at him. He put a hand on the handlebar and shifted his weight. "I don't have to," he said. "If you don't want me to." "It's fine," Wade said. He was surprised to find that he meant it. The boy nodded. He sat on his bicycle for another minute, looking at the lettering. Then he pushed off and rode south down Main Street toward the river bottom. Wade watched him go. He went back inside. He stood at the workbench. He put his hand on the firebox and left it there. After a while, he opened the firebox and took out the letter again. He read the second page. The second page said, "There is $43,000 in this box. I started saving when Lila got sick in 1990 because I knew I was going to need it for her care, and then I found that the union pension covered more than I had thought and I never spent it down. After Lila died, I kept saving. I sold the 7-acre piece behind the house in 2003 to a man named Whitaker who put a hayfield on it. I put that money in too. I am leaving this money to you because I owe you something I cannot pay you back any other way. I owe you a father who did not lie about your uncle. I cannot give you that. I can give you the money. I will tell you what I would have done with it if I had been able to do anything. I would have used it to put a new roof on this building and to put a heater that works in the upstairs room. I would have used it to bring the truck bays back, up to the point where somebody could run a workshop out of them. I would have used it to teach a couple of the boys in this town how to letter a sign and how to weld a frame and how to keep a piece of equipment alive past the point where the manual says to throw it away. That is what I would have done. I am not telling you what to do. I am telling you what I would have done if I had been you. I trust you to know the difference between a piece of advice and an instruction." Wade read the page twice. He folded it back into the envelope. He went out to the truck and got his sleeping bag and brought it inside and laid it on the cot. He sat on the cot and looked at the floor. The next morning he walked to the feed store. He told Maybelle about the firebox. He did not tell her about the letter, not at first. He told her there was a notebook and a stack of photographs from October of 1979 and that he had read it. She did not say anything for a long time. She was leaning on the counter with both hands flat on the wood, and she was looking at Wade in the way she had of looking at him, direct and unhurried. Finally she said, "Did Earl write down what happened?" "He wrote down what happened," Wade said. Maybelle nodded once. She straightened up. She turned to the percolator behind her and poured 2 cups of coffee and slid one across the counter to Wade. "Cleve Henderson should hear that," she said. "Cleve was on the crew that night. He has been carrying his own version of it for 47 years. "Where do I find him?" Wade said. "You don't," she said. "He'll come to you. I'll send him." Cleve Henderson came to the fire station the next afternoon. He drove a 1987 Ford F-250 with a bench seat and a dented tailgate. He was 78 years old, thin as a fence rail, with a white mustache and a Carhartt jacket and a pair of work boots that had been resoled twice. He parked the truck in the apron and got out and walked across the gravel to the open south bay door, and stopped there with his hands at his sides. Wade had heard the truck pull in. He came down off the stairs from the second floor. Cleve looked at him. The two men looked at each other across the bay floor. Cleve nodded once. Wade nodded back. "You're Earl's brother's boy," Cleve said. Wade said he was. Cleve came into the bay slowly, in the way of an old man who has worked hard all his life and has stopped being in a hurry. He stopped at the workbench. He put his hand flat on the wood. Wade watched the gesture. He understood that this was a man who had spent a great deal of his life putting his hand flat on this particular workbench. "Maybelle said you found something," Cleve said. "I found a notebook," Wade said. He kept a private journal alongside the dispatch log. He kept it for 41 years. The entry for the night of the Inman fire is 3 pages long. Cleve did not look up from the workbench. "What does it say?" "It says my father made the call to dispatch from the payphone at the SO. It says my father had been drinking. It says he couldn't remember the home line. It says Earl knew. It says Earl never told anyone." Cleve was still for a long time, then he said, "I figured." He said it the way a man says a thing he has known for a long time and has never spoken aloud. He still did not look up from the workbench. He moved his hand along the wood in a small, slow motion, the way a man rubs a piece of wood he has known for years. "I never said it to Earl," Cleve said. "I never asked him. I knew something was crosswise between him and your father, and I knew it started that week, and I knew the call from the SO went through Ruby's switchboard. Ruby is my wife's cousin. Ruby told me once in 1983 that the voice on the phone was a Renfro voice, but it was not Earl's. She told me that because she had been carrying it and she could not carry it anymore. I told her to put it down. I told her I would carry it for her." He paused. "I have been carrying it ever since." Wade did not say anything. Cleve looked up. His eyes were wet, but his face was steady. "Earl never said a word," he said. "Not in 27 years of working for him on that crew. Not on the night Lila died. Not when he retired. Not when the merger happened in 2011 and we shut this place down. He kept it. He kept it for your daddy. He kept it for my daddy," Wade said. Cleve nodded. "Your daddy was his brother. People do that for their brothers." Wade thought about that. He went up to the second floor and brought down the firebox. He set it on the workbench. He opened it. He took out the letter and he handed Cleve the second page. He let Cleve read it. Cleve read it slowly, holding the page up to the light from the bay door, his lips moving very slightly. When he was finished, he handed the page back. $43,000, Cleve said. $43,000, Wade said. "What do you intend to do with it?" Wade looked around the bay. He looked at the workbench and the hooks above it and the fire axe wrapped in oilcloth and the south door he had gotten working all the way up and all the way down. He looked out through the open door at his father's truck parked on the gravel apron. "I'm going to put a roof on this building," he said. "I'm going to put a heater in the upstairs room. I'm going to open the bays." He stopped. He looked at Cleve. "I don't know what I'm going to do after that." Cleve nodded. "That's enough for now," he said. The two men stood at the workbench. Cleve put his hand on the wood again. After a while he said, "Earl bought that vise in 1972. He paid $42 for it at the Sears in Knoxville, and he carried it home on the front seat of his pickup with a seatbelt around it. He treated it like it cost $1,000. He used to tell me, a vise is the one tool that holds the other tools in place while you do something useful. He said the same thing about being chief." Wade looked at the vise. He understood after a moment that Cleve had just told him something important and was waiting for him to know it. "Will you come back?" Wade said. "To work on the roof." Cleve looked at him for a long moment. "I'll come back," he said. That afternoon Wade walked up the hill to the Methodist cemetery. He walked along the rows. The cemetery sloped up gently from the church. The older stones were at the top of the hill, leaning in the way old stones lean, the names worn to faint impressions. The newer stones were down at the bottom by the parking lot. Wade walked the rows in order. He found his uncle's stone in the third row from the top. Earl Thomas Renfro, 1937 to 2009. There was nothing else to say. Wade stood at the foot of the stone for a long time. The wind came up the hill and moved the dry grass against his boots. He did not say anything. After a while, he reached into his coat pocket and took out the small flat river stone he had picked up that morning from the bed of the creek that ran behind the fire station. He set the stone on top of the headstone. He stepped back. He walked along the row. He found Lila's stone next to Earl's. Grace Nightticker, 1939 to 1991. She was loved. He stood there for a moment. He thought about the photograph on Earl's desk. He nodded to her. He moved on. He found Toby Inman in the row below. Toby Franklin Inman, 1970 to 1979 or born. There was a small jar of wildflowers at the base of the stone. The flowers were fresh, no more than a day or two old. Wade stood there looking at the jar. He understood that somebody was still bringing them. He went back down the hill. A woman was sitting on the bench by the cemetery gate. She was old, maybe 81 or 82, in a wool coat the color of dry oak leaves, with her hands folded in her lap. She had silver hair pinned back. She looked up at Wade as he came down the path. She did not stand. "You are Wade Renfro," she said. Wade stopped at the gate. "Yes, ma'am, Lou Inman," she said. "Frank's wife, Toby's mother. I figured you'd come up here sooner or later. Maybelle called me." Wade stood there with one hand on the gate. "Sit down a minute," Lou said. Wade sat on the bench beside her. He did not know what to do with his hands. He folded them in his lap the way she had hers. "I want you to know something," Lou said. She was looking out over the road toward the river bottom, not at Wade. "I figured out what happened by 1981. I am not a slow woman. I never asked your uncle. I never asked Frank. Frank died in 1996 still believing your father had done him a kindness by calling the dispatcher at all. I let Frank go to his grave with that. Earl knew that I knew. He did not know that I knew, but I think he suspected. He came to this cemetery every decoration day from 1980 until 2008. I came on the day before so we would not have to see each other. I would find his stones on Toby's marker when I came up. Little river stones, some of them painted. He painted one of them every year. They are in a box in my pantry. There are 28 of them." Wade did not say anything. "Your father did a hard thing on the night of October the 16th, 1979, Lou said. "He drank too much at the VFW, and he called the dispatch line instead of Earl's home line because he could not hold a 4-digit number in his head. My son died because of that. I am 82 years old. I have had 47 years to be angry. I have been angry. I am not angry anymore. I am telling you this because I want you to know that I am not angry, and because I know what you are going to do next, and I do not want you to do it on my account." Wade looked at her. "What am I going to do next?" he said. "You are going to want to make a public thing of it," Lou said, "because that is what people do when they find out the truth about somebody who lied to them. You are going to want to clear your uncle's name in the town. You are going to want to write a letter to the Knoxville paper. You are going to want to stand up in the church and read the entry from the notebook." She turned her head and looked at him. "Don't," she said. "Earl did not want that. He never wanted that. Earl wanted his brother's grandson to know what kind of man Earl was, and he wanted Frank to die without ever having his face rubbed in the kind of man his friend was. He got both of those things. Don't undo what he did with his last 28 years. Wade looked at her for a long time. He took the third page of the letter out of his coat pocket. He had been carrying it folded in his wallet since that morning. He unfolded it and held it out to her. He had read it twice already that day. Lou took the page. She read it twice. She folded it carefully and held it in her lap. "He says here," she said, "that he was going to leave something with you. He says he sent it in 1992 and that I sent it back. I did send it back. I sent it back because I could not yet hold it. I would like, if you have it, to hold it now." Wade said he had it. He did not have it on him. He said he would bring it the next day. He brought it the next day. It was a single Polaroid, the only one in the firebox that had not been with the others, that Earl had tucked into the front cover of the leather notebook. It showed Toby Inman, age 8, sitting on the bumper of the 1962 Mack pumper at the fire station, with a fire helmet on that was too big for him, with Earl standing beside him with one hand on the boy's shoulder. Both of them were grinning. The photograph had been taken in the spring of 1978. Lou held it for a long time. "Earl loved that boy," she said. "I know, ma'am," Wade said. He did not stay long that day. She did not ask him to. He walked back down the hill. Haley came on a Thursday in the middle of November. She drove down from Knoxville in a 2022 Lexus Crossovers that she parked beside Wade's F-150 in a way that made the truck look like it had been left at the curb. She had not called ahead. Wade was in the second-story room running a new electrical line for the heater Cleve had helped him install on the previous Saturday. He heard her car door close. He came down the stairs. She was standing in the open south bay door. She was wearing a blazer over a sweater, and she had her hands in the pockets of the blazer, and she had her hair pulled back the way her mother had used to wear hers. She looked at her. "Hi, Dad," Haley said. "Haley," he said. "Mom called me," she said. "She said you came down here. She said you got an inheritance. She said the lawyer wrote her about it because you didn't update your address with the divorce decree." She paused. "She is not asking anything about it. She just told me you were here. I drove down." Wade stood at the foot of the staircase. He looked at his daughter. The last time he had been in the same room with her had been at his father's funeral in 2019. She had been 21 then. She was 24 now. She had her mother's mouth and her grandfather's jaw, and Wade had no idea what he was supposed to say to her. "You want some coffee?" he said. She nodded. He made coffee on the camp stove in the upstairs room. They sat at the small kitchen table with the cups between them. Haley looked around the room. The cot, the heater, the calendar, the bell tower stairwell. "Mom said you've been living in this building," she said. "Yeah, by yourself." "By myself." She looked at her cup. She turned it in her hands. "I want to make an offer," she said. "I know it's going to come out wrong. I rehearsed it on the drive down and I still don't know how to say it. I have been doing well at the firm. I bought a townhouse off Cumberland Avenue in September. There is a room. The room is small, but it has its own bathroom. I want you to come back to Knoxville with me. I want you to live in that room until you find your feet. I have $50,000 in my savings that I want to give you as a no-strings, no-paperwork gift. I am not asking you for anything. I am not asking you to be a different person than you have been for the last 14 months. I am asking you to come home with me and let me help you start over." She had said it all in one piece. When she was done, she stopped and looked at him. Wade looked at his daughter. He thought about the room in the townhouse off Cumberland Avenue. He thought about the $50,000. He thought about the way she had said home with me, and he thought about what that word would have meant to him a year ago, in October, when he had been sleeping in his father's truck in a Cracker Barrel parking lot in Asheville with $140 and an unread letter on the dashboard. He thought about the bell rope upstairs. He thought about Darrell Pickett, who had ridden by on his bicycle 4 times in the last week and who had come into the bay yesterday and asked Wade if he could watch him weld. He thought about Cleve Henderson, who had come back on Saturday. He had said he would come back, and who had brought a crew of 3 other men in their 70s, and who had helped Wade pull the rotted decking off the south end of the roof. He thought about Maybelle Cobb, who had brought a covered casserole on the night the heater first worked, and who had set it on the workbench and said only, "This is from the sorghum boil. Cleve said you missed it." He thought about Lou Inman. He looked at his daughter. "Haley," he said, "I appreciate that. I appreciate it more than I know how to say. I want you to hear me when I tell you that I am not coming back to Knoxville. I am not taking the $50,000. I am staying here." She had been ready for him to say no. He saw it in her face. She had not been ready for him to say it the way he said it. Her mouth tightened, not in anger, in something else. "Why?" she said. Wade thought about how to say it. He looked at the cot against the wall. He looked at the calendar. "I came back for the bell," he said. She looked at him. "I don't know how to explain that to you yet," he said. "I don't know how to explain it to me yet. There is a thing in this building that my uncle was holding for somebody, and that somebody turned out to be me, and the holding of it was the work of his life. If I leave now, I would be putting it down without ever picking it up." Haley sat across the table from him. She turned the coffee cup in her hands. "Will you come up to Knoxville for Christmas?" she said. "Yes," Wade said. She looked at him for a long time. "Will you call me?" she said. "Once a week." "Yes," Wade said. She said again. She sat with him for another hour. He showed her the firebox. He showed her the notebook. He did not show her the letter, because the letter was for him, and because there were things in the letter that she did not need to know about her grandfather, not yet, and maybe not ever. He showed her the photographs. He took her up the bell tower stairs and let her see the bell. She stood next to the bell with one hand on the frame. "Have you rung it yet?" she said. "No. When are you going to ring it?" "I don't know," Wade said, "when it's time." She nodded. She did not push him on it. She drove back to Knoxville at 4. He stood in the gravel apron and watched the Lexus until it was out of sight on Main Street. Darrell rode past on his bicycle 10 minutes later. Darrell saw the empty apron. He stopped. He put his foot down. "Was that your daughter?" Darrell said. "Yes." "She going to come back?" "For Christmas." Darrell nodded. He did not ask anything else. He looked at the open south bay door behind Wade. "You want to weld something today?" Wade said. Darrell thought about it. "Yeah," he said. They worked on a piece of half-inch flat bar at the workbench for 2 hours. Wade showed Darrell how to set the amperage. He showed him how to strike an arc without sticking the rod. He showed him how to hold the helmet down with his neck so his hands stayed free. Darrell laid a bead that was 3 inches long and uneven in the middle, and that held when Wade tested it with a hammer. Darrell looked at the bead for a long time. "It's ugly," he said. "It holds," Wade said. "The first one you lay that holds is the one that matters." Darrell nodded. He came back the next day. He came back the day after. The 4th page of the letter was the last one. Wade read it on the first cold Sunday of December, sitting on the cot in the upstairs room with the heater on. The page said, "Wade, The boy I could not get to is buried at the Methodist next to his mother, who is now beside him. If you can do one thing for me, please bring him a stone from the river every spring. The stones do not have to be painted. I painted them because I thought he would like the color. He was a boy who liked yellow paint. I do not know if you have anyone in your life now who is the age he was. If you do, please remember that the small things you teach them will outlive both of you. That is the only kind of inheritance worth leaving. The money in this box is a small kindness from one man to another. The building is a larger kindness, and the work you do in it will be the largest kindness of all. I am not asking you to forgive your father. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am asking you to put on the kettle and to invite people in and to ring the bell when it is time. Your uncle, Earl. Wade read the letter twice. He folded it. He put it back in the envelope. He put the envelope in the firebox. He closed the cabinet. By the following March, the South Bay was insulated, and a new metal roof had gone on over the whole building. Cleve had brought his nephew Travis down from Crossville for 2 weekends to help with the roof. Maybelle had fed all of them out of the back of her Chevy on the gravel apron. Darrell had ridden over after school every day during the roofing and had carried shingles up the ladder for 2 hours at a stretch. Wade had paid him in cash, and Darrell had taken the cash without comment and had used it to buy a used Lincoln 225 bus welder from a man up in Wartburg, which he kept in his grandmother's garage and brought over on Saturdays. Lou Inman came down to the station once a week starting in February. She brought a pie on the first visit, and after that, she did not bring anything. She would sit in the office in Earl's chair, and she would read whatever Wade was reading. They did not talk much. The cat that lived in the bell tower came to sit on her lap. She stayed an hour each time, and then she went home. The young man in the Army surplus jacket walked up the gravel apron on a Saturday morning in early April. He was 26. He had been honorably discharged from the Marines in February. He had been sleeping in a Greyhound bus station in Knoxville for 9 days. He had hitched as far as Cookville and then walked east. He had heard about the workshop from a man at a truck stop in Crossville, who said there was a fellow down in Polk Hollow who would feed a man and not ask questions. His name was Jesse. Wade saw him standing at the edge of the apron. Wade was at the workbench. Cleve was at the workbench beside him. Darrell was in the South Bay, running a bead on a piece of square tubing he was making into a stand for his grandmother's clothesline. Wade put down the file he was holding. He walked across the bay to the open door. He stopped at the door and looked at Jesse. Jesse was looking past him at the workbench, at Cleve and Darrell, at the warm lights on inside the bay. Wade thought about his uncle, sitting in this same doorway in 1979 before everything. He thought about the small kindness Earl had said the money was. He thought about Maybelle, who had given him a sandwich and an apple at the feed store on a day he could not have paid her. He thought about a sentence Earl had written in the 3rd page of the letter. The bell, he had written, was the thing that called the crew in. The bell was the thing that told the town a thing was happening. Without the bell, a man would not know to leave the porch and come to where he was needed. Wade looked at Jesse. "You eaten today, son," Wade said. Jesse shook his head. "Come on in," he said. He took Jesse into the office. He sat him down in Earl's chair. He went over to the camp stove and started water for coffee. Cleve watched from the workbench. Cleve put down his file. Cleve started pulling things out of the small refrigerator they had run a cord to from the south wall. Eggs, butter, a half loaf of bread Maybelle had brought down on Friday. Darrell had stopped welding. He had pushed the helmet up off his face. He was watching from the bay floor. Wade looked across the bay at him. "Darrell," Wade said, "run up the stairs and pull the bell rope." Darrell looked at him. "Why?" Darrell said. "Because it's time," Wade said. Darrell set down the stinger. He climbed the stairs to the 2nd-story room. He climbed the bell tower stairs. Wade and Cleve and Jesse stood in the bay and listened. The bell rang once. The sound came down through the wooden floor of the bell tower and through the boards of the 2nd-story room and out into the bay and through the open south door and into the gravel apron and across Main Street and up the hill to the Methodist cemetery and over the ridge where the coal tipples had stopped pulling coal in 1987 and down into the river bottom, where the freight trains ran the long curve before Cumberland Gap. It rang once, then it stopped. Darrell came down the stairs. Maybelle Cobb was standing on the porch of the feed store across Main Street when the bell rang. She turned her head toward the fire station. She stood there for maybe a full minute without moving. Then she went back inside and called Lou Inman. Lou came down to the fire station an hour later. She came in through the open South Bay door without knocking. She had a pie and a tea towel in her hands. Wade looked up. "You rang the bell," Lou said. I rang the bell, Wade said. Good, Lou said. She set the pie on the workbench. It was a Sunday evening in May when Wade carried his father's Stanley toolbox out of the truck and into the bay for the first time. He had not opened it since October of 2019. He had carried it on the seat beside him for 14 months. He set the toolbox on the workbench. He looked at it. He opened the lid. The wrenches were inside, the tape measure. The buck knife folded into the bottom tray. Underneath the tray, in a small compartment Wade had forgotten was there, a yellow envelope. Wade's father had written on the front of the envelope, in his careful upright hand, the words for Wed, "If you ever get to Polk Hollow." Wade opened the envelope. There was no letter inside. There was only a single Polaroid. The Polaroid was of Earl and his brother, taken on the same Mack pumper Toby Inman would later sit on, in the spring of 1962, the two of them in their 20s, both of them grinning, with their arms around each other's shoulders before any of it had happened. Wade looked at the photograph for a long time. He put it on the workbench above the vise. The next morning he and Cleve started teaching Daryl how to letter a fire truck. The evening came down slowly, the way evenings come down in the Cumberland in late spring. The sun went behind the ridge, and the sky over Polk Hollow turned the color of poured pewter. Wade sat on the steps of the South Bay door with a cup of coffee in his hand. The bell rope was coiled on its peg in the tower. The Stanley toolbox sat open on the workbench behind him with the Polaroid of his father and his uncle leaning against the vise. Daryl had gone home an hour ago. Cleve had gone home before him. Maybelle had walked across Main Street with a covered dish and had left it on the steps and had not come in. The dish was still warm. Wade drank the coffee. Somewhere down the valley a freight train began the long curve before Cumberland Gap, and the horn carried up to him, 2 long notes and 2 short. The cat that lived in the bell tower came down the stairs and crossed the bay floor and sat on the concrete beside him and looked out at the road. Across Main Street the lights had come on in the feed store. The Methodist steeple stood white in the last of the light. Wade was 52 years old. The bell was hung. It had rung once. It would ring again. The door was open. The light was on.